All right. Good morning, everyone. I am so pleased to welcome you to this virtual roundtable. I'm Kelly O'Grady, dot.LA's chief host and correspondent and head of video. So Los Angeles has seen the development of a vibrant tech and startup ecosystem across a number of industries in the last few years. And our mission at dot.LA as a media and events company is to shine a light on the innovation in this quickly growing community. First, I would love to take a moment to thank our partner on this event, PledgeLa, for being so passionate about this topic and just so willing to work together on making this event happen. So if you aren't familiar, PledgeLa is a coalition of venture capital and tech leaders that work to measurably increase diversity, inclusion, and community engagement within the LA tech ecosystem, accelerating access and opportunity for all Angelenos. So the perfect partner for this event today. Before we jump in, I'm going to do a few boring housekeeping items, has to be done. So all attendees are going to be muted for the duration of the event. The speakers are going to be displayed on video throughout the discussion. And I really want to stress this one. Our aim is to make this a two-way discussion. So, we've brought these incredible guests here for you to engage with them. So we want to hear from you. At the bottom of your screen, you're going to see an icon for Q&A. So please feel free to submit any questions or themes you have in the section. We will make sure to get to them throughout the course of our discussion. And finally, a recording of this event will be posted on the dot.LA website by the end of the day. So if you want to share it with folks that weren't able to attend, go back and re-listen, it'll be there. So let's dive into today's focus. In the wake of George Floyd's death at the hands of the 4 police officers in Minneapolis, we are seeing an outcry across the country and honestly, even the world in many forms. Protests on social media, individuals and companies turning inward and reflecting on how to better foster diversity, equity, inclusion. Because this isn't just about George Floyd. This is about the bigger picture, the systems and culture in place that allow these things to happen. So 2 weeks ago, we hosted a similar roundtable on building equality into LA Tech's future, and the overwhelming message that came out of it was so powerful. Bring your humanity. When you're having these conversations, when you're addressing these issues at work. And so with today's discussion, we want to dive deeper. What are some approaches and actions we can take to measurably increase diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace? If I'm a tech leader, what are some tangible things I can do when I leave this discussion? So I am so pleased to be joined by 2 incredible guests, Kobie Fuller, who's a partner at Upfront Ventures, and Oona King, who's the VP of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at Snap Inc. I'd love for you both to introduce yourselves and give a little bit of background on your work. Kobie, you are basically the face of dot.LA today. You're being featured in our 3-part series examining diversity in venture capital as well. So by the way, attendees, we'll be putting the links to those articles in the chat here if you want to check them out. So Kobie, our face of dot.LA today, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Excited to be here and have this conversation. A little bit of background. I grew up in Boston. I'm an East Coast guy, and I grew up as what I consider to be a nerd athlete. I ran track, and all I did was play video games to a point where if I did that today, I'd probably be a celebrity because I'm winning Call of Duty championships. But back then, nobody cared. Went to Harvard undergrad, and at that point while in school is when I got the startup bug. During the late 90s, a buddy and I came up with an idea around using the internet to connect soccer players with recruiters, pivoted it to being more of an all-encompassing soccer portal where we raised some angel capital and started going out to raise VC dollars. And it was during the point of actually pitching VCs that I got enamored with this whole world of venture capital. And I realized this person can come and ask all these very intrusive questions and learn all about our business, and then goes to another company, and gets to understand the patterns, what makes a great business. And I was like, I want to be that person. I was fortunate enough a year out of school to find an opportunity at a New York-based venture capital firm called Insight Venture Partners, where the entry-level position is an analyst that's smiling and dialing, trying to find opportunities, begging CEOs to actually take your call. And I was just relatively, lucky and good at the opportunity and the job out of the gate. One of my first deals was ExactTarget that Salesforce ultimately acquired for a couple $2 billion. I invested in a video game called RuneScape that happened to be one of the top MMORPGs. A few of us left, started a fund in Boston called OpenView, still going very strong. One of their big wins, a company called Datadog, that's now a public company based in New York. I invested in a company called Instructure, which is an LMS that Canvas is, the name of the company is Canvas. Then I left, moved to LA for the first time, and really just fell in love with the West Coast. Joined Revolve as CMO, helped scale that business quite rapidly. And to the point after 2 years, I really didn't want to make my life all about just fashion, no offense, but I'm a nerd. And so after 2 years into it, I got recruited by Excel Partners, went up to the Bay Area for 3 years. And that's honestly the point in the journey where I got to meet a lot of the partners at Upfront, coincidentally, while I was not even in LA. Co-invested with my now partner, Mark Suster, on 2 companies. One's called Invoca, another called Osmo. And honestly, spending more time with Mark and team and hunting for deals down in LA than I was in the Bay Area, to the point where I decided to make their journey back down to LA, join now as a partner. It's been now 4 years into the gig, and I've invested in some LA companies like The Wave, which we just announced a Series B funding of over $30 million, reinventing virtual concerts, to companies like SureSale, trying to reinvent the whole used car industry, as well as The Mighty, which is trying to create a new method by which people can engage in a social platform around health. And then the last company that is relevant towards today's topic is a business I founded called Valence, which is really focused on uniting the global Black talent and connecting them with economic opportunity, either being capital or senior leadership positions in large corporations. So that's a little bit about my background. And again, very excited to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us. And speaking of Wave, I saw that John Legend is performing on June 25th. So I've been without concerts. I'm super excited for that. Oona, I'd love to hear a little bit about you as well.
Yeah, sure. So I was born and grew up in the UK, in London. My father's African-American. My mum is white, Jewish, Hungarian, Scottish, Irish kind of thing going on. And so I grew up in a white environment in North London at the time. I don't know where all the mixed race and Black kids were, but they weren't around. They weren't around my part of London. And yeah, so I decided for whatever reason, when I was 4, I think I wanted to be an air hostess. But when I was 5, I decided I wanted to be Prime Minister. And so my mum explained to me that if I wanted to be Prime Minister, I had to become a member of Parliament. And so I feel it took me a long time, it was like 25 years. Finally, I'm 29, get elected, and became the second woman of colour elected to the UK Parliament. More interestingly, really, I think, is that I was shocked to find out only a few years ago, actually, that I was the 200th woman of any colour ever elected to the UK Parliament. And that's quite relevant to the diversity debate, because I grew up thinking we were kind of sort of doing a bit better than we actually are when you look at the situation for underrepresented groups. So yeah, I did that for I was a member of Parliament for an East London constituency, which was majority Muslim, Bangladeshi. Really interesting and brilliant constituency. And then worked for, I should say that, so I ran for 3 parliaments. I won 2, I lost the 3rd. I realized I was just about to skip over that. Lost. I think one of the big things in life is you got to lose at the right point. You got to be lucky with your losses. And it was a great point for me. And the Prime Minister then, that was going to be after Tony Blair, asked me to come at Downing Street as his senior policy advisor on equalities, as it was then called, I guess what we call the DEI space today, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that was one of the best experiences I've ever had. I was basically in my dream job, really, because, okay, it wasn't being Prime Minister, because once I was his assistant, I then very quickly realized that was the worst possible job anyone would ever want, ever. But it was great to have that kind of authority, walk into the room and say, the Prime Minister says. And it was just, I realized that I, in some respects, had more influence than when I was actually an elected member of Parliament. Anyway, I then got an opportunity. It's quite funny, actually. A headhunter was ringing me and saying, oh, you should come and apply for this job as Chief Diversity Officer for a UK broadcaster who in Britain we quite love, the UK broadcaster Channel 4. Anyway, and you may not have heard of Channel 4, many of you on it, but you probably heard of their films like 12 Years a Slave, which won the Oscar for Best Film, and Black Mirror, that kind of interesting and diverse content. Anyway, I was like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. I'm in my dream job. I work at Downing Street. I'm the Prime Minister's senior advisor on equalities. Thanks, but I'm not interested. Anyway, this woman rang back like literally 10 times. And in the end, I was like, you don't need to ring me again. I've said no, I'm not going. And then she said, I'll just never forget. She said, Oona, I'm a Black woman. You're a Black woman. You will come in and have this meeting with them. I was like, oh, she pulled the race card. Oh, I see. And then being a Black woman, I was like, all right, I'll come in and have the conversation. And, the reason that's relevant is I think, my God, my whole entire career since then is based on the fact that this headhunter was a Black woman. Right? Because people go out and try and get underrepresented groups, and they never have those underrepresented groups on the whole, which is, Kobie. That's why so much of Kobie's work is so great, to be able to have that better connection in terms of recruitment and the diverse talents that's out there. Anyway, so I leave Downing Street, walk down the road to the Channel 4 headquarters, and when I walked in the door, I was just like, oh my God, this is just so different. It was like from Downing Street, it was the equivalent of being like washed up on a desert island in the most idyllic circumstances possible. I mean, you didn't have to work 23 hours a day, and it was just extraordinary. And I was like, oh, I really like this. I've changed my mind. She was right. So I became the chief diversity officer for Channel 4. I did think I'd made a mistake when I rang my team back at Downing Street. I'd been preparing for the G8 summit, and Obama was coming. And I said to them, oh my God, did he come? And they were like, yeah, he came to the office. He stood at your desk. I was like, what did you ask him? And they said, oh, we couldn't think of anything. I was like, oh my God. And then that day I had to go in for my first big meeting at Channel 4. And it was a commissioning meeting around a UK soap opera, basically. And I was like, what have I done? What have I done? I've left the world of the G8 to talk about soap operas. I was kind of shocked and devastated. I was like, it's that Black woman. If it had only been a white woman, this wouldn't have happened. But the point is, sorry, I hope I'm not saying anything that I shouldn't be saying. I'm just being honest of why I went in and took the opportunity. And in fact, it turned out that it was the best decision I ever made, because I'm really interested in this, this intersection between essentially popular culture and media and tech. And so from Channel 4, I also became a member of the House of Lords. It's feudal privilege is an extraordinary thing. It's like a lifetime appointment. Probably shouldn't be. That's another matter. And from there, I went to YouTube, because I was like, well, the future of broadcasting, how do you take that along? And from there became Google's director of diversity strategy. And from there to Snap, where I'm very pleased to be today, based in LA. And thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for sharing all those details. I appreciate how you painted the picture so vividly. There's so much for us to dive in from both of your backgrounds. But the first question that I'd love to ask is a little bit more general before we dive in on specifics. How are you experiencing everything that's going on? What, if anything, feels different about this movement versus what we've seen, even just 6 years ago? So I'd love to start with you, Kobie.
Yeah, I think a lot's different. Well, first, we're doing this over a Zoom call versus being in a physical space with one another. And that's because we're living in this global pandemic that is infected millions worldwide, it killed many as well. And if you think also about what it's done to the Black community in the United States, it's really ravaged it at a level that's disproportionate to other communities. I believe the statistics, if I'm not mistaken, are roughly a 6x mortality rate relative to other ethnicities. You also look at the access to capital, specifically PPP loans, that have not been able to make their way into some of the Black-run businesses that could be in communities where community banks don't have relationships with this support system. We've been put in a position where it's really, really, really been a very difficult time just with COVID. You layer on top these public killings that are just insane. I think you're seeing people realize that this is enough. And then overall, it almost feels like for those outside of the Black community, it's almost like this great awakening. It's like, wow, like I didn't realize it was that difficult for my fellow man or woman. So as I navigate this overall dynamic we're in as, a Black man, a father, and realizing that, look, like nothing's changed for me. Like I've realized that this has been a country that has systematic oppression that's going back for centuries, and that we literally haven't moved away from some basic things. I'm optimistic that people will start trying to drive change and real action will take place. But I think it's going to take time. I think people need to realize that public displays of just statements, the Black community wants to move past just that. We want to actually see action. So for me, my hopes are that this period in time doesn't become something where we see the support and then it starts trailing off 6 months out, but there's continued momentum, continued real action towards driving change. And people will realize that this is not going to happen overnight. This is going to take focused effort, investment, in doing things that you're very uncomfortable doing. And I think people also are starting to realize that prioritizing Black voices in the boardroom, in the leadership positions, and across the organizations, it's not just the good thing to do. It's not just social justice. It's actually now business. This is actually the right thing to do from a business perspective. And it's very evident because I'm sure Oona feels the same way. Like my phone's been ringing off the hook from leaders at other large corporations that frankly don't have a Black voice to actually listen to with regards to what's going on right now. So it's a problem where you have to ask your Black friend that has no economic interest in your business to save you. I mean, it's kind of like, it's been really crazy the last couple of weeks to see some of these circumstances actually play out. And I think it's one where people need to realize for this problem to really be solved, you have to solve it at all levels and look within with regards to not where you have Black voices, but where you don't, and fix it. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about things right now and trying to do my part to hopefully drive change where I have the ability to do so. But that's just the way I'm feeling about things right now.
Yeah, and just to chime in, it's there's kind of this dissonance between, on the one hand, there's the revulsion at the usual, unfortunately, prosaic murder of Black people by institutions of the state, essentially. And then secondly, though, there is some optimism, because it does feel like this is a moment, I would say not just a chance in a generation, possibly a chance in a lifetime. And I do feel that this extraordinary thing that white America, for example, has essentially seen Black America, not necessarily understood the depth and the breadth and all the rest of it, but has seen Black America. Now, you wish it wouldn't take Black people being killed on video, and think of all those where there wasn't a video there. And all those stories of resisting arrest were not proved downright lies because there wasn't that independent verification. But it is this it's just the replaying of history, and so the Black community has kind of two responses. I do fall into the, hey, I'm really glad for whatever reason white people have woken up. My favorite bit of swag ever was from YouTube, and it was this sort of like big football jacket, soccer, I should say. On the back, it had in huge letters, "Stay woke." And my 8-year-old daughter said to me, "Mummy, why do you wear that jacket all the time? Is it because you're so tired?" And I was like, I am a little bit tired, but that's not it. It's because on the whole, not always, but on the whole, Black people honestly feel that white people are asleep to racial injustice, and they want them to wake up. And they have woken up. And some in the Black community take the attitude, too little, too late. And even if they've woken up now, they'll be asleep again. in a couple of months, when the next thing comes along, as it will in this fast-paced world, I don't take that view. I completely understand it. You know, they're like, well, what, you know, how could they not have known? How could they not have noticed? And I know that as well as any other African-American family. You know, I mean, like, my uncle was locked in a mental asylum because he applied to Mississippi University. You know, literally in my family, I know that a Black man applies to go to university and white authorities put him in a mental institution, right? White people, they're like, no, really? I know, you know, my dad, he lost his country, was exiled on trumped up racist charges, nothing to do with him. Again, connected to him applying to university. It's this thing when, you know, Black men want to go and get an education, like the whole system is there to shut that down. 40 years he was exiled from America. You know, I was sent on his behalf to funerals of his family, my family, and that was my childhood, because a Black man, and it's just one story amongst millions and millions and millions, a Black man was accused of things he hadn't done and was essentially born guilty. And the system will find a way to give its verdict and hang you out to dry. So when white people now are seeing this, I understand the rage of some in the Black community are like, well, they should have known. But you know what, how I try and explain it is, I was saying this to a group of Black friends the other day. I was like, hey, wait a minute. You telling me that if you happen to have been born white, are you really telling me you would be in that 5%, maybe that 1% who totally got it, who totally understood the minority experience? Well, if you are, I just don't buy that. I don't buy that for a minute, because the point is, this is about a system. And whilst that doesn't absolve individual responsibility, it is we're saying this is systemic racism. Well, therefore, I am grateful that white people have woken up. I admit that my gratitude will turn to rage if they then go back to sleep. But I think it's an extraordinary moment, an extraordinary opportunity. And we should do everything in our power to translate the slogans on the street, silence is violence. How do you translate that into corporate America? Managers must speak on this issue. They can no longer be silent on this issue. And they have to tie specific DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion outcomes into centralized business plans. Separate is never equal. Don't have your D&I strategy on the side. Build it in at the heart of what your business is doing. That is what this moment demands. And that's what I want to see us do.
Oona, I don't want to see your rage.
Well, thank you both for being honestly just so raw and sharing those specific stories. Something that really stuck with me when we ran this event 2 weeks ago, Austin Clements said, you know, I'm not really sure that this would feel any different if everyone wasn't at home on their couch and they've gone through the majority of their Netflix catalog. And so to your point, it's great that we're having these conversations, but what's next? You know, how do we turn this into action? And so Oona, thank you for so eloquently leading us to the next part of our discussion. I'd like to frame this in how can we do this in the workplace, right? And so there's two ways to do that. There's not only increasing diversity, right? So just getting people in the door, but also creating an inclusive environment. So once they're there, you know, there isn't turnover, their voices feel heard and valued, and they're creating impact. And so I'd love to start off with a conversation about hiring practices, okay? So especially in smaller startups, there's a tendency to recruit within one's network. It's very high. So what specific steps can companies do to break this trend, and where should we be going to recruit, and through which resources? And I'd love actually to hear a little bit from you, Kobie, on this first, because of your work at Valence.
Definitely. So it's good tee up. I think, yeah, I think you kind of framed it really well. Part of the issue is that people naturally recruit from their pre-existing networks. So lots of times the pre-existing networks mirror themselves in terms of the way they look and just the way they grew up, socioeconomic status. And it really dawned on me there was an issue around, for those individuals who'd want to tap into other networks, especially diverse networks, they needed to get access to them. And this was illuminated a couple years ago when at Upfront, we created an inclusion clause in our term sheets, really encouraging our portfolio company CEOs follow the Rooney Rule to try to spend more time searching for underrepresented minorities and candidates as they're hiring senior level positions. So I reflected upon this position we put our portfolio companies into, and then started listening to our portfolio companies coming to me many times saying, hey, we're about to hire a VP of sales, a CMO. You're Black, you probably know every Black person out there. Why don't you make some introductions? And I'm like, contrary to popular belief, we all don't know one another. But then I realized it'd be really interesting. What if we did? What if there was a central place by which Black talent could connect, find one another, and build with one another? So I was sitting at my desk at Upfront, and I thought, how would I do this? So I thought, let me create a centralized, beautiful database. It can't be some sterile list. It had to be something that's interactive. It had to be something that celebrated the community through a different lens. So I thought about using superheroes as this methodology by which we can actually start spotlighting certain people that deserve to get some shine within the community at all levels of seniority, and then photograph them and present them almost as literal superheroes. So I was doing this as a passion project on top of my day job of investing and helping the portfolio companies I invest in. And then realized as I was putting this together and talking to individuals and companies and actual VCs about it, that this actually may be a real business, because people were telling me they'd love to pay for the data or they potentially would love to fund the company. And it wasn't even a company, it was just a website. And I realized, wait a minute, like GP at a venture fund probably can fund my own company or idea, which frankly, I more would enjoy funding someone else's idea because it's my job, but this was something that just felt like a calling and had to exist. So about a year and a half ago, we incubated the business as a true portfolio company, put real firm capital into the business, recruited a team, and we started building and learning from talking to the users out in the wild. We had a number of events that we put together to get feedback around what would really make a great experience if we brought the Black community together. So our first event was in conjunction with Netflix on the opening day of Black Godfather, where we brought about 100 senior executives across Los Angeles to Netflix to watch a movie, had a panel discussion afterwards, and really started seeing a lot of the Clarence Avant story being something we're trying to emulate with regards to this digital platform Valence. We did an event in Atlanta with roughly 300 people, bringing together a lot of the senior executives within that community there at the gathering spot, and started seeing people just lusting for this type of interaction and also follow-on digital interaction. November of last year, we formally launched and announced an alpha version of the product and started getting really great feedback. Fast forward to where we are right now, we have roughly 7,600 Black professionals strong on the platform across different parts of the country. Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, and Atlanta are the main areas where we actually have the most density. And the overarching mission is for us to actually take this Black talent that we put together, really try to empower them to connect and build with one another. They're the primary consumer, primary user we're focusing on, because we want to build value within the Black community. And then create bridges with economic opportunity. Economic opportunity being capital. So really trying to better integrate and have the venture community get access to the best founders that are in the platform. And also senior leadership positions, board roles, senior roles, director or above, while not neglecting all facets of the community. So anyone who identifies with the community can come on board and have the ability to try to find their pathway up to be like an Oona or a Peggy Alford or a Robert Smith. And it's, in my opinion, our opinion, that it all takes a centralized platform where we can try to learn from one another, deconstruct the professional advancement pathways, start building true structured insights around what it takes to achieve key milestones, especially dependent on background and just overall history in terms of how are you been in your life, and then allow us through peer bonding to grow together and help one another. So that's really what we're trying to accomplish with Valence, and just create bridges with those entities, those people, like you said before, startups that may not have that network. Take that excuse off the table where it's like, I have no idea where to find all Black talent. You can just go to Valence, and we're still growing, still the beginnings, but it's our aspiration that we take that issue off the table.
Yeah. And Una, how have you thought about this in your time at Google and Snap? And, for let's say I'm a CEO of a tech company or a startup, where in addition to Valence, have you been finding this before Valence existed?
Yeah, and congratulations to Kobie for getting that off the ground, whilst doing a day job. I know how it is. But so listen, there are some really basic foundational things that companies need to do, and those things are different depending on the size of the company. Obviously, I want to mention a few of those, but then I really want to tell you a story that, because yes, I'll be talking about data. Yes, you have to fundamentally ensure that your hiring and recruiting process are not doing what virtually all of them do, which is prioritize speed over diversity. DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, will always lose out to speed. So you need to actually put some processes in place to ensure that you get a more diverse candidate slate, known as the Rooney Rule. You need to come up with the version that is going to work for your company. You need to get, as I was saying, the data in place, a diversity data dashboard that is going to give exec level breakdown so that people have more granularity. Everything's hidden in the aggregate. When you just have these aggregate numbers, that's not going to get you anywhere if you want to specifically deal with hiring issues. But one of the things you also have to step back and do is understand that hiring is just part of a sum. It's hiring is made up of what are you doing to keep your diverse talent where you are, e.g. how inclusive is your culture. One proxy for measuring that is data around promos. Which groups are getting promos, i.e. they're valued, which groups are not, i.e. quite often you will then see they're going to be on their way out. So you've got the hiring data, but it is the sum of the promo minus attrition. Hiring plus promo minus attrition equals representation. People too often just focus on the hiring, but what you're doing there, whilst it is critical and you must do that, if you're only focusing on the hiring, it's this thing of having to walk and chew gum at the same time. It can be very draining. But if you're only focused on the hiring, it's like filling up the bath with the plug out. You will not actually ever increase your overall representation. So that's what you got to think about in the background or the foreground, maybe I should say. But what I wanted to just give you this example is the story, because fundamentally what you got to understand is that having a more diverse workforce is going to benefit you. It's going to lead to greater creative excellence. And if you don't understand that, if you think you're doing it to tick a box or to be nice to those poor underrepresented groups who just can't get into your company, then you are wildly wrong. And you will not benefit from this. So this example goes back to when I was Chief Diversity Officer at Channel 4. What the head of Film 4 told me, I heard what happened when she was looking to have a Black film director, right? Channel 4 had never invested in a Black film director. And she was like, this is terrible. We must do something. She told her, team, go out and find me someone we could invest in as a Black film director. There must be someone. Like, go and find them. They come back and they were like, oh no, we can't. You know how it is. You just can't find the diverse talent. Kobie, how often do you hear that? What you have to understand, the answer is never that talent isn't there. The answer is that you haven't found it, right? So you have to have that mind frame. And my English is going a bit out of the way. I think I mean mindset or framework in terms of your approach. But the point is that she told her team, well, then go out again, go out again. And look, they came back after, eventually it was a year later. This is what I'm talking about, the problem between speed and actual diversity. And she said, and they said, we can't find anyone of the caliber. You've heard that before. We can't find anyone of the caliber that Channel 4 would usually invest in. And so what she said was, well, then go and look in an adjacent talent pool, because either you're looking in the wrong place or you're asking for the wrong qualifications. It can't be that they're not there. So she said, okay, I'm going to look in the visual artist, an adjacent talent pool. She found someone. She invested in him long term. Don't think you can just bring underrepresented groups in and they're going to just like fly like that. They are not. Like, it's a long-term approach to talent development. She invested with him 3 films over 5 years, and his 3rd film won the Oscar for Best Film, Steve McQueen, 12 Years a Slave. Right? People don't understand. Do you realize, Channel 4, money couldn't buy the publicity that Channel 4 and the brand enhancement that Channel 4 got from that. And it came essentially out of a DEI scheme. You know, it came out of a white woman saying, this will not stand. This is not acceptable. Go back and look again, look harder, look further, look elsewhere. And if you can't, if even then you can't do it, then be innovative. Go and look in an adjacent talent pool. So just everyone bear in mind, you need to do the stuff I mentioned at the beginning. You need to get the data in place. You need to ensure that people aren't forced through speed to sacrifice diversity. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a mental shift that this is not a favor you are doing for something else, this is an investment to make sure your business has a long-term future.
Well, I think that the things that both of you mentioned are actually very tangible, right? Okay, so where is the talent? There are networks being created like Valence. And then also when you're thinking about it, speed. Don't sacrifice quality of candidate and also diversity of candidate just because, okay, we need to get someone in there right now. So I think those are some really actionable things that hiring managers can take away. I want to take this one step further before
can I just mention on that, because of COVID,
yeah.
Because of COVID, it is a really good point at which people can pause their actual hiring. Right now, there is time now to get those network. A lot of companies have deferred hires towards the back end of the year. It's the first time that their recruitment teams in like years have had a chance to actually think about what they're doing as opposed to be on the hamster wheel. Like, use this moment, use it wisely.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. So everyone watching this, have that in mind. COVID is actually a gift in some ways when it comes to this. There's a silver lining. So let's say we have, I'm a leader of a tech company, right? I've got a candidate pool of people that I'm excited about. There's diversity, but I don't have a lot of people that look like that in my company. And so when these people come into the interview, they're going to be looking around and saying, okay, how am I going to be successful here? There's no one that looks like me here. There's no one on the website that looks like me. How do you create an interview process and get over that hump so that candidates, because it's a two-way street, right? I'm interviewing this person, but they're also interviewing me. Do they want to work here? So how do you deal with that for companies that don't necessarily have that diversity in place yet? Whoever wants to jump in.
Oona may be the expert on that, but I'll definitely chime in.
Shall I start off? I mean, when we're talking about how we can get more diversity into the process, I think it's really important to focus on how you increase the candidate diversity. Legally, HR and recruitment teams all around corporate America feel strangled by legal requirements. That's not necessarily the right interpretation, because what the law says is that you can absolutely increase the diversity of the candidate slate that you're looking at. And that's really where you need to start. Increase that diversity. There was research by Harvard Business Review which said, in terms of women, for example, if you have more than one woman on the final shortlist, you would think maybe the chances of hiring a woman double or they triple. No, the Harvard Business Review research says that they actually increase 79 times. There's 79 times more probability if you have more than two or more on the final shortlist. Now, my math is very poor, but I'm still like, how can that work? I don't get that. And they essentially explained to me that it's to do with psychology. It's to do with the people on the interview panels not thinking, oh, they're a token. Like, I want to avoid tokenistic hiring, but apparently, I mean, go and check it out. The Harvard Business Review article on this is really, really interesting. But your question is, also more around what other thing, what can companies do to ensure in that process that when people are interviewing the company, so to speak, they see something or someone that can look like them. And one thing that we're looking at, because you've got to be careful also that you're not doing the classic thing, which is you've got one woman engineer. So now on top of her job, she's got to spend 50% extra being on every interview panel because there are no other diverse people there. There are other ways that you can give people the chance to interview the company. So we started, for example, at Snap, I was interviewed, well, I was interviewing them, but they were interviewing me, by the ERGs. So our Black ERG leads, they were they were asking me, and also it was amazing for me to see who they were. And it also gives candidates the opportunity to ask things more informally, because then you can take it out of hey, what's your coding like? Hey, did you get that question right? And it's more an opportunity for people to have an interview really about the culture of the company. And more, especially with Gen Z, it's the culture fit. In tech, it's been used as a way to keep people out. I mean, we kind of had these discussions in Google for many years, that culture fit is what kicks half the diverse candidates out. And whose culture anyway? It's that thing like when I was in Parliament, oh, how are we going to make the women succeed? Let women be like men. It's like, no, let the system be accepting of men and women, not just one. So there are quite a few things involved, but I do think bringing in other parts of the company, especially ERGs, to help with that process is a really helpful thing to do from both sides.
And then if I were to chime in, especially maybe from the startup angle, where the organization may be relatively small and maybe some of that diversity hasn't really been established because there's just not enough people in the room to begin with. One, I think from the actual interviewer's perspective, you got to take a step back and, as best as possible, strip your unconscious biases and look within yourself with regards to how are you looking at applicants that come from backgrounds that are not like yours, and really reflect on that. I think two, really taking a step back and reaffirming your values, your corporate values, and what matters to you with regards to the environment you're trying to bring in, the culture you're trying to create, and properly communicate that to the candidate is extremely important. Because on the flip side, many candidates, us being Black, it's not new to us to be one of the only faces in the room that looks like that. So we're really trying to tease out, like, is this a place do I want to work with? Are these just good people? And if you, during the interview process, come off as like a bad person, you're biased, you can see microaggressions that occur at some point in the process. You can see the way other people look at you when you're walking in and out of the office. We see that stuff. So it all comes down to the way the senior leadership actually ingrained the culture around inclusivity, around just being able to think about other people and backgrounds and not come up with these judgments and these biases, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, and start from the beginning. And what happens, I think, and this is more theory, Oona's clearly the expert here, is that if you don't start this early, you don't start this to the point where you have control of the organisms. These companies are organisms, and you have control around, you shape them early on. If they start growing and growing and growing to a point that they start becoming toxic, and there's a certain part of the organism that's clearly infected, to be able to strip that out, I don't even know how that's done, but it becomes this point in which these microaggressions, these biases in the interview process, they happen potentially without senior leadership even understanding it. And that's when you really have a bigger problem there, like Oona get brought in to sort of really kind of help address. And so I kind of encourage companies that are at the infancy, where they have the ability to really form this culture and be maniacal around making sure that culture just persists, and being ruthless with regards to when someone violates that culture, having zero tolerance, just being able to enforce that. And that's where I think the startup ecosystems have the ability to actually make a dent here. And also us as VCs, we have the ability to, when we see that early on, to step in and interject. And I think the board has a duty to be able to actually look in and see how these companies are actually run and actually drive change when they see something's not really living up to that standard.
Okay, so I want to dig in on that a little bit more. So we've talked a little bit about the hiring, but really now let's get into this piece around culture and inclusivity, because I think that is, like you say, more important than checking the box that, look, we've hit the metrics, we have people here, if they don't feel valued, if they're just going to leave. So unfortunately, right, we have people in the door, the real work starts. You often hear conversations about any group, women, minorities, et cetera. Okay, this person only got the job, because of a focus on DEI. And that is so incredibly toxic for someone to have to walk into that environment and prove themselves. So what are specific steps that you would take, as you were just saying, Kobie, to change the hearts and minds and prevent that non-inclusive environment? Either of you. Yeah.
Well,
I can kick off if you want, Kobie. I mean, this is a huge point, and the way we're tackling it specifically at Snap, and companies are coming to this to varying degrees, is really around giving people the skills they need to be able to be decent people in the workplace. And what I mean by decent is people that understand, especially people managers, what inclusive leadership requires. And secondly, to give them the ability to see inequity. Like what these last weeks have shown us is that people do not see the same thing. They can sit in the same room, the same meeting. They do not see the same thing. They do not have the same experience outside the office, and they do not hear what can be microaggressions or even macroaggressions. So when I say tools, I mean, there's a very specific framework around allyship. It's a helpful framework. People that are successful, even if they don't have the language or the framework itself, they employ those principles. And the principle, the first and foremost one, is you need to be proximate. You need to understand what it actually is like to be the only woman engineer on your team, or the only African American, or the only Hispanic, the only one. People with disabilities, LGBTQ. I mean, the socioeconomic status is a huge one as well. But so to give people those skills, actual allyship training, and there are some great companies out there providing great expertise grounded in behavioral science. So we work with a wonderful company called Paradigm, and they've spent years researching this. Other thought leaders that we work with have been, and this is a really important point, have been really clear on why has, for example, in tech, why has the publication of DEI data around tech since like 2014 essentially resulted in nothing at all? And you know what the answer is? The answer is, I think we're coming to recognize, is that data on its own, although, as I said previously, is an absolute necessary prerequisite on its own, not only will it not get you past the finishing line, it won't even bring you anywhere close, right? Tech can 10x on everything under the sun. Why not on getting more diverse people into their workforce? And the answer is that there has been, for the vast majority, and remember, underrepresented groups, hey, they're underrepresented, not just in the company at large, but specifically in leadership positions. That underrepresentation means that they are not able to have the impact that they would like. So the skills, having the skills to be able to have racial literacy, understand how your Black coworkers view this. There's a history. I gave you like one little example. I could give you just from my own family, like another 50 or more, and every African American can do the same, right? So start to understand that. And with that allyship training, what it does is enables majority groups to understand privilege. And we all have privilege in different ways at different times. So understand your privilege, be inspired to act on it. When you have that intrinsic motivation, people then need clear goals. Too many companies are too scared to bring goals into the DEI space. You need that. That is what distinguishes, that is the main thing that distinguishes companies that make traction on DEI to those who don't. So, I hope that gives you some idea of what you got to cover. You need to give your people the practical skills. And once you've motivated them so they get beyond the discomfort, which is very real. Hey, I don't want to say the right thing. Hey, this isn't my problem. No, actually, yes, it is your problem. It is your problem. Oh, and in fact, majority community, actually, okay, let's not say it is your historically, okay, whoever's problem it is, the point is it's your responsibility now because you have the power to change that. So move the onus from underrepresented groups to those with power. And, then I think you are in a good position where you give people a voice, everyone a voice. Give managers a voice, the confidence to tackle these issues head on. Because if they don't, they and their company will be doomed in terms of fundamentally addressing what it means to have an inclusive culture.
And I could chime in. Clearly, Oona is the expert here, and for me, I'd say I don't have as much experience in this area clearly, but how I look at it is that there needs to be, on top of the skills that the organization should be disseminating across the entire employee base. People just need to have a mindset shift. And if you come to the table with this mindset where because of the color of someone's skin, their gender, or socioeconomic status, that you have the ability or means to actually treat them differently or judge them, you're just wrong. That's just being a bad person. So how does that actually get reversed? I don't know. That's something that's going to take time in terms of people actually taking a step back, being really truthful with themselves in regards to when they see a black face, what do they think? What assumptions do they make? And what assumptions do they make when that person's actually working right next to them? And some basic things I just preach with my 5-year-old son is live by the golden rules. Treat someone like you'd want to be treated. So if you would treat someone with this bias and this judgment, these microaggressions that clearly if someone did to you, you would hate, like, why are you going to do it to someone else? Just be a good person. So for me, I think it comes with just the skill set and being able to have corporate leadership and support to hopefully systematically root this out. And then the individuals, it's on the onus of them to be able to actually act like a good human being. And there needs to be peer accountability. When someone sees someone violate that, the organism, again, should just reject it. Just reject those toxins if you want to have a culture that hopefully just lives by the values senior leadership tries to actually truly convey and put on the table.
Kobie, I love what you said there, but can I just mention, one of the things we're finding is that everyone actually, on the whole, everyone thinks they are a good person. Like that is exactly what shields them from thinking that, grave injustice and institutional racism has anything to do with them. Because it's like, hey, I'm not racist, and the point about having this skill set is to enable people to understand what the system is, what the impact is, and then to give them the ability to not just identify equity, but speak up. And I put, if it's of help to anyone, I put on my LinkedIn page, I mean, it was straight after, it was essentially the first weekend that companies were thinking how to help their managers speak on this. So, maybe if I wrote it again, I might add other stuff, but it's like, it has within it like a 2-pager, because I'm also, as a politician for 20 years, I'm like, all right, yeah, the treatise is great, but what's the 2-pager? So there is a 2-pager linked in there. You have to get to page 3, I think, but there is a 2-pager linked. It's called Right Side of History, the actual post. And it's what I sent out to the whole team at Snap, just saying, look, you do need to speak up. I know it is really worrying, and I know you think you're a good person, essentially. And hey, the point about racism is that it doesn't matter if white people think they like black people. That is just not the point, right? You have to understand it is a system, and it requires a systemic understanding of the barriers that are facing your underrepresented groups. And it's not only race, obviously, gender is huge, socioeconomic status, disability, LGBTQ plus, age. There are many, many ways this plays out, but having that understanding and then being brave enough, that courage comes into it. And the last thing I'd say on this is, you then have to, in your company values, you have to define what they are. At Snaps, I'm going to be really honest here, and this kind of worries me because it's going out on YouTube, but at Snap, they are kind, smart, creative. And literally when I heard it, my first thought was, kind? That's interesting. What corporation in America has kind as a corporate value? And my second thought was, what the hell does that mean anyway? How are you going to hold anyone to that, right? When I got that, I was really interested that in the last year, Snap has spent a huge amount of time actually defining what are the 3 attributes, sub-attributes within each of those categories that we need to see you display. And so, for instance, under kind, they say you must demonstrate courage. You can't be kind if you don't have the courage to speak out when you see something bad happening. And I think for people to actually understand, how are we going to, it can't all be about metrics, but on the other hand, if you want to say be a good person, you need to actually give people very specific parameters about how that plays out in the workplace. So just, being able to ramp up with some data and practice and parameters what we mean, because otherwise it can all just be, applehood and mother pie, and we are past that point. I have to apologize that my kids are busting in now, so fingers crossed. I'll just go on mute.
No, I think those are very actionable steps from both of you, and something that I've heard a lot in my conversations with people is we've all experienced something. It doesn't matter what background you come from. in even if the smallest ways that you've been frustrated someone else didn't care about. And really thinking about, okay, if I'm really passionate about women's rights, like I need to be, and I'm frustrated when someone doesn't care about that, I need to be just as passionate when someone else, is being marginalized, even if it's something that I've never experienced. So I think those things that you have shared are really actionable. And I want to ask one last question that you've brought up about metrics, something that came from the audience, but also something I was having a conversation with my colleague Max yesterday about, is what's the goalpost here? Okay, so we're talking about change, but what are the metrics? What are the things that we need to see that we should be moving towards? And so Melissa Strawn has put a question into the chat here. Are there some KPIs that you track to measure your success? What should that chief people officer be tracking to move the needle toward a more diverse workplace? What can we see when we've finally arrived, right?
You know what? I'll go first because I've got a little man like pulling on my arm. You got to give him a little break here, babe. No, not. Well, you wait 1 second. Hang on. Just shush. In terms of those larger goals, you do need to have some broad ones like, well, is our aspiration that we reflect society? Is our aspiration that we reflect our user base? I mean, we used to have this conversation at YouTube, for example, where we wanted to increase the numbers of women on the platform. And then when it came to writing the diversity annual report, it was like, you got to be careful. You don't want to say you want to reflect society. How are you going to do that? And what about market available talent pool? How's that going to work? And I think you do need to get smarter with what is realistic. I think having goals that will never be attained is just depressing, and people lose hope and they can be counterproductive. At the same time, you need to have those stretch goals and you need to put them in where they count. And more we're finding that it counts with leadership. If you can get more diverse leaders in, they will disproportionately impact the diversity of the people that come after them. So, you want to have, for example, oh my goodness, can you shut the door? I tell you what, I suppose if I could make use of the invention of a headphone, that would be extraordinary, wouldn't it? But the point is that you can't just talk vaguely about this anymore. It's this thing of how do you translate silence is violence? In other words, silence is harmful. How do you translate that into KPIs? Think big picture. Could we say that in 5 years' time, 50% of our leadership will be women, 50% of our board will be women, 30% of our new hires, if we're talking about America, and you've got to think that there are different minority groups in every part of the world and every country. But, in America, we know in race terms, the groups most locked out of the tech industry are African American and Hispanic. Obviously, there are smaller racial groups as well. To be thought of. Can we say that 20% of our hires, by a certain time point, hiring goals are really helpful? They are sometimes more helpful than representation goals. So, you just have to, there isn't a silver bullet. That is what I have to say. There isn't a silver bullet, and therefore the advice is not bulletproof. That cannot terrorize you to the point that you don't take action because the time for inaction is over. You can do it. Come on, America. We'll do it.
Very
Kobie.
well.
Yeah.
Hard to follow that. I think the only thing I would try to just double down on is focusing on getting diversity in senior leadership. Sometimes many people think, oh, this doesn't include my board, this doesn't include my C-suite. Get diversity across all facets of the organization, but when you get diversity within senior leadership positions, there's a huge impact that can come from that. And then making sure that all the voices that you have that are diverse around the table, make sure they're heard, make sure they're empowered, and then also make sure that you're investing in them and helping elevate them, because these are individuals that come from different backgrounds, different experiences, that if you're not listening to, if they're not actually affecting your organization and actually driving impact, you're actually, again, it goes back to, this is not good business. You're actually conducting bad business. So for me, it all comes down to from the top down and being able to make sure you govern the appropriate manner.
And last point, I swear, then I will zip it on this, right? Last point, don't just think about representation goals and metrics, think about product. You know, at the end of the day, especially, I mean, in the tech sector, it's like, what are we not thinking about how products that impact billions of people actually can have DEI built into them in terms of the audience focus groups that build them, the actual people on the products themselves, and the vision for the products, and what are the metrics for product, how many, you know, people from underrepresented groups are on a particular platform, how do we support those voices? You know, there's a whole ton of other metrics around product, because that's the point of having the people is to create a better product, and quite often that gets left off the table in these conversations.
1000%.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Honestly, I had so many more questions I was going to ask you, and then we could go on forever and ever. But I just want to thank you, Oona and Kobie. I cannot say how much I appreciate your candor and your willingness to share your experiences and advice. I'm sure it's overwhelming right now. Everyone's looking to you for answers. So thank you for sharing with us today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's great. I said to my team this morning, what's worse, being ignored by leadership or being spammed by leadership? But I think we know the answer.
And honestly, thank you so much to you, our audience. We are pleased to continue connecting with you. If you want more content from dot.LA, check out our website and sign up for our daily newsletter. And as we mentioned before, we have a really interesting series focusing on diversity in the venture capital space from Ben Bergman and Rachel Urenga. Kobie is our face of dot.LA today, like I said. And if you enjoyed today's event, we'll be running a strategy session next Tuesday on Wall Street's perspective on everything that's going on with the pandemic. So thank you so much for your time today, speakers. And that is it for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck, everybody out there. We're relying on you to speak up. So thank you. Thank you for taking the time. Bye.